weeks ago, I posted this essay on my Patreon, and I'd like to read it for you here. It says, Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, friends, and fellow citizens, 75 years ago, in the darkening heat of another American summer, a lone senator from Maine rose on the Senate floor to deliver what history would remember as the Declaration of Conscience. Margaret Chase Smith, then a first-term senator, the only woman in that chamber, and a member of the president's party, spoke not with rancor, but with resolve. Her words cut through the haze of McCarthyism like a clean wind, refusing to surrender her integrity to the furies of her age. I don't want to see the Republican Party ride a political victory to the four horsemen of calumny: fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear, she said. And then she went on. I don't want to see the United States become a nation that is afraid to speak its mind, a nation that is afraid to be open and honest. Today in August 2025, I rise not as a senator, but as a fellow citizen, a witness to our nation's promise and peril. We stand again at the edge of a precipice. Our republic, forged in the fires of dissent, is once more beset by those same horsemen. If our generation is to claim its place in the American story, we must meet the challenge with clarity, courage, and conscience. History does not repeat, but it often rhymes. In Smith's day, the menace wore the mask of anti-communism, but its true face was power unmoored from principle, smearing neighbors as traitors, demanding loyalty oaths, banishing the inconvenient and the brave. Too many, even the well-meaning, fell silent in the face of false patriotism. The price was paid by innocents, teachers, artists, public servants, whose lives were wrecked by accusation, not evidence. But one woman spoke. And because she spoke, others found their voices. McCarthy's reign eventually broke, not because he ran out of enemies, but because America remembered what it means to be free. What I stand against. I write now, as then, against the creeping normalization of civic degradation in American life, against the ideology that seeks victory not through persuasion or public service, but through intimidation, silencing, and the consolidation of unchecked power. I stand against loyalty tests, formal and informal, that demand subservience to party, personality, or orthodoxy as the price of participation in public life. Whether these take the form of ideological questionnaires for civil service, threats to judges or journalists, or digital witch hunts that enforce conformity through fear, they are anathema to a free society. I stand against the weaponization of our institutions, when the machinery of government is used to punish critics, intimidate opposition, and subvert the will of the people. I stand against media intimidation and the starvation of truth, whether by cutting funding to independent outlets, restricting access to journalists, or flooding the airwaves with lies and spectacle in place of news. I stand against the impulse so natural in frightened times to divide us into real and unreal Americans, to pit neighbor against neighbor, and to sow suspicion where there should be solidarity. Most of all, I stand against silence, my own and yours. For the greatest danger is not the demagogue who shouts, but the good people who whisper their doubts and then do nothing. What I stand for. I stand for the idea that America, that our government derives its legitimacy from the consent of the governed, and that every citizen, regardless of origin, creed, or conviction, has a right to speak, to dissent, to belong. I stand for the Constitution, and for the eternal work of forming a more perfect union, not as a static document, but as a living promise. The Bill of Rights is not an antique, but a shield for every generation. Its protections of speech, assembly, press, and conscience are not conditional on party or popularity. I stand for public servants who serve the public, not as instruments of any leader's ambition, but as caretakers of the common good. I stand for the principle that dissent is not disloyalty, and that loyalty, if it means anything, means fidelity to the law, truth, and the public trust. Above all, I stand for hope. The faith that even in troubled times, Americans can rediscover our better angels, find common ground, and renew our commitment to liberty and justice for all. Let us not mince words. The events of recent years have tested the limits of our endurance and the boundaries of our tolerance for abuse. When a sitting president openly demands ideological loyalty from the federal workforce, proposing the replacement of thousands of career civil servants with political appointees, requiring new hires to affirm the values of the movement, we are flirting with the very purges that darkened the 1950s. When judges who rule against the administration face threats, investigations, or the loss of security, we must ask ourselves, do we value an independent judiciary or merely a compliant one? When news outlets critical of those in power are defunded, blacklisted, or denied access to official briefings, when journalists face intimidation for asking uncomfortable questions, we risk replacing the Fourth Estate with a chorus of cheerleaders. When university professors, teachers, and students are targeted for speech deemed unpatriotic, when curriculum is dictated by political fiat, we choke the very wellsprings of inquiry and innovation that have made America great. When protesters, union organizers, and advocates for marginalized groups are met not with dialogue, but with surveillance, harassment, or violence, we stray away from our national promise. And when ordinary citizens, fearful of losing jobs, friends, or safety, learn to self-censor, to speak in code, or to retreat from the public life altogether, we must recognize that democracy is dying, not in thunder, but in a slow, suffocating silence. I know the cost of speaking out. Margaret Chase Smith did not end McCarthyism. For her troubles, she was stripped of power, mocked by her colleagues, and consigned for years to political isolation. But history remembers her words. History remembers the moment when, surrounded by the four horsemen of calumny, she stood alone, and in so doing, made it possible for others to stand as well. We live now in a time of digital mobs and algorithmic enforcement, when dissenters are not just criticized, but erased. The tools of intimidation are faster, more impersonal, and more far-reaching than Smith could have imagined. The courage required today is not lesser, but greater, for it must withstand not just jeers in the chamber, but tidal waves of coordinated outrage, threats, and even violence. But let us also remember, Smith's example is not merely a warning, but a beacon. Every age invents new forms of fear, but the antidote is eternal. Truth spoken with integrity, even when inconvenient. What then must we do? First, we must reclaim our personal responsibility as citizens, not as mere spectators of history, but as its authors. If you have a platform, use it for truth. If you have a vote, use it for conscience. If you have doubts about the conduct of those in power, speak those doubts. Not as slander, but as the beginning of public deliberation. Second, we must defend those whose voices are threatened. If a journalist is silenced, amplify their work. If a judge is threatened, send a message of support. If a neighbor is targeted for speaking out, stand by their side. When we protect the vulnerable, we protect ourselves. Third, we must insist that our institutions serve the whole public, not a faction or a strongman. Demand transparency. Expect accountability. Reward integrity, not obedience, in those who serve. Fourth, we must reject the politics of humiliation, scapegoating, and spectacle. Debate vigorously, but argue ideas, not identities. Refuse to demonize opponents or to fall into the trap of thinking that the ends justify any means. Finally, we must remember what Smith knew. The right way is not always the easy or popular way. Quote, standing for right when it is unpopular is a true test of moral character. Unquote. The true test of democracy is not how it behaves when it is easy, but how it endures when it is hard. If you've read this far, perhaps you too feel the unease, the suspicion that something precious is slipping away. You are not alone. History belongs to those who show up. Democracy, like conscience, must be renewed by each generation. Let this be our generation's declaration. We refuse to be ruled by fear, ignorance, bigotry, or smear. We reject the cult of personality and the demand for unthinking loyalty. We claim the right and the duty to speak, to dissent, to hope. I invite you, friend and fellow citizen, to stand with me, not in opposition to any one person or party, but in affirmation of a higher standard. Let us be the people who kept the faith, who loved our country enough to tell it the truth, who believed that decency is not weakness, and that courage is contagious. In this, as in all things, conscience is the first step to renewal. May ours be a generation that found its voice, and by doing so, helped America find its soul again. The time to stand is now, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. May we pass the test together.